Welcome to Strength in Leos.
What is up, everybody? It's Evan back with Strength in Leos. What is up, everybody? It's Evan back with Strength in Leos. I hope you're having an amazing day today, and I hope whatever you're doing, this podcast just makes that task a little bit better and a little bit easier. And with that said, we're going to jump into the fourth part of the Sasobek series. I've gotten a lot of great feedback so far on this series, and you guys seem to be enjoying it, so thank you so much. And it's just been an honor to put out this information for everybody to listen to. I appreciate the support, as I said before, and all the support from you guys on social media and through so many podcast platforms. And with that support, I'd like to give out a Patreon shout out to Leonardo. Thanks for joining us on Patreon and becoming part of the Patreon family and supporting Strength in Leos. For those of you guys who are interested in getting a little bit of behind the scenes access and then also doing Patreon hangouts and so many other things that we do over on Patreon, make sure to join us at patreon.com/strengthinleos. And before we go on, I want to say thank you to our sponsors. The Blessed Gecko over the last 5 years has acquired an incredible variety of geckos from some of the top genetics available. In the past, they have maintained all animals within their own collection as holdbacks, as they have taken time to observe genetic pairings, dispositions, sizes, coloration, patterning, and etc. Go check them out on Facebook and Instagram, and of course go check out what they have available for sale. Impeccable Gecko is a small to mid-sized, family-operated, hobbyist breeder operation. They specialize in leopard geckos with high-quality genetics. At Impeccable Gecko, integrity and animal welfare is above all else. Miles Schwartz works with some awesome morphs and lines that are not only high quality, but also fairly rare in the hobby. Go check out their social media and awesome YouTube channel. John Scarborough of Gecko Boa Reptiles has kept and bred more than 80 species of reptiles, and his focus has turned to specializing within the genus Eublepharus. He has worked hard to pioneer some of the most cutting-edge leopard geckos while maintaining genetic purity and honesty. Go check out their website for their most up-to-date availability, and don't forget to follow all of their social media. Suburban Geckos is operated by Chris Charlton. Chris's passion and enjoyment for herpetoculture, and more specifically leopard geckos, drove the desire to take his hobby to the next level. Suburban Geckos treats every animal with the utmost care and respect, and cut no corners when it comes to the health and integrity of their geckos. Suburban Geckos is a strong supporter of the Strength in Leos podcast, so follow them on social media and check out what they have available for sale. Grove Geckos is a family-owned and oriented medium-scale leopard gecko business. Lance Musgrove is a hobbyist breeder with the goal of producing healthy, visually stunning, and refined genetics for their geckos. They can be found online at grovegeckos.com or on social media like Facebook and Instagram. Give them a follow and reach out to Lance at any time. Spottytail Geckos is a small hobbyist breeder that focuses on quality genetics and maintaining excellent husbandry. Andy got started in the hobby when his daughter wanted a pet leopard gecko. He immediately fell in love with the animals and the hobby. Andy started breeding his first leopard geckos in 2015. To this day, he keeps a very small collection sourced from top-tier breeders. Cenozoic Reptilia works with an array of morphs, such as white and yellows, max snows, red stripes, rainbow stripes, various lines of tangerines, clown crosses, and so much more. As they continue to integrate themselves within the community, they look forward to continuously producing greatness. The mission is none other to give back, which is also why they give 15% of their proceeds to charitywater.org and promise to give more as they continue to grow. Go check out Cenozoic Reptilia on social media, and don't forget to check what they have available. I hope you're having an amazing day today, and I hope whatever you're doing, this podcast just makes that task a little bit better and a little bit easier. And with that said, we're going to jump into the fourth part of the Sasobek series. I've gotten a lot of great feedback so far on this series, and you guys seem to be enjoying it, so thank you so much. And it's just been an honor to put out this information for everybody to listen to. I appreciate the support, as I said before, and all the support from you guys on social media and through so many podcast platforms. And with that support, I'd like to give out a Patreon shout out to Leonardo. Thanks for joining us on Patreon and becoming part of the Patreon family and supporting Strength in Leos. For those of you guys who are interested in getting a little bit of behind the scenes access and then also doing Patreon hangouts and so many other things that we do over on Patreon, make sure to join us at patreon.com/strengthinleos. And before we go on, I want to say thank you to our sponsors. The blessed gecko over the last 5 years has acquired an incredible variety of geckos from some of the top genetics available. In the past, they have maintained all animals within their own collection as holdbacks, as they have taken time to observe genetic pairings, dispositions, sizes, coloration, patterning, and etc. Go check them out on Facebook and Instagram, and of course go check out what they have available for sale. Impeccable Gecko is a small to mid-sized, family-operated, hobbyist breeder operation. They specialize in leopard geckos with high-quality genetics. At Impeccable Gecko, integrity and animal welfare is above all else. Miles Schwartz works with some awesome morphs and lines that are not only high quality, but also fairly rare in the hobby. Go check out their social media and awesome YouTube channel. John Scarborough of Gecko Boer Reptiles has kept and bred more than 80 species of reptiles, and his focus has turned to specializing within the genus Eublepharus. He has worked hard to pioneer some of the most cutting-edge leopard geckos while maintaining genetic purity and honesty. Go check out their website for their most up-to-date availability, and don't forget to follow all of their social media.
Suburban Geckos is operated by Chris Charlton. Chris's passion and enjoyment for herpetoculture, and more specifically leopard geckos, drove the desire to take his hobby to the next level. Suburban Geckos treats every animal with the utmost care and respect, and cut no corners when it comes to the health and integrity of their geckos. Suburban Geckos is a strong supporter of the Strength in Leos podcast, so follow them on social media and check out what they have available for sale.
Grove Geckos is a family-owned and oriented medium-scale leopard gecko business. Lance Musgrove is a hobbyist breeder with the goal of producing healthy, visually stunning, and refined genetics for their geckos. They can be found online at grovegeckos.com or on social media like Facebook and Instagram. Give them a follow and reach out to Lance at any time. Spottytail Geckos is a small hobbyist breeder that focuses on quality genetics and maintaining excellent husbandry. Andy got started in the hobby when his daughter wanted a pet leopard gecko. He immediately fell in love with the animals and the hobby. Andy started breeding his first leopard geckos in 2015. To this day, he keeps a very small collection sourced from top-tier breeders.
Cenozoic Reptilia works with an array of morphs, such as white and yellows, max snows, red stripes, rainbow stripes, various lines of tangerines, clown crosses, and so much more. As they continue to integrate themselves within the community, they look forward to continuously producing greatness. The mission is none other to give back, which is also why they give 15% of their proceeds to charitywater.org and promise to give more as they continue to grow. Go check out Cenozoic Reptilia on social media, and don't forget to check what they have available.
So yeah, we're here back with Matt. Matt, how's it going?
Pretty good. How are you doing?
Doing pretty good. I'm glad to be back on this series with you to explain to the people, a little bit about you more, and then also talk a little bit more about your projects and then some of the stuff that you were working with.
Yeah, absolutely. It should be fun. We can kind of go back through history a little bit and kind of tell everybody kind of how things got started, how things got a little bit crazy with genetics, and we'll kind of dive into that on this episode.
Definitely. We're gonna go back in time, just like Matt said, and talk a little bit about some of the kind of the crazy genetic things that were happening back when Matt was really prominent in the hobby, starting back from the mid 2000s, when a lot of crazy cool stuff was happening with leopard geckos in terms of genetics. So going back kind of when you were working with Alberto, Matt, how was the genetic scene? How were things with leopard geckos and kind of some of the things that were popping up in leopard geckos in you guys' collection?
Okay, so we'll start off with like 2005-ish. That's probably the best starting point for this. That's right whenever I was still in the military, but I was getting into leopard geckos, was seeing some of the stuff that Alberto was putting out there. And to kind of set the stage, Alberto from A&M Gecko was, just kind of really becoming his own name in leopard geckos in like probably 2005-ish is whenever he was becoming very, very popular. He was getting animals from Ron, and, he was breeding his own animals as well. And, I think we touched on this on one of the previous episodes where basically what Alberto would do at the very beginning, whenever Alberto got into this, he would buy animals from Ron, which back then Ron really just had a price list with no pictures. And basically handpick the animals that Alberto wanted to keep, and then he would take individual pictures of the other animals and kind of sell those or take them to shows and sell them. And then it would basically, at a slightly increased price so that he could afford to keep back the animals that he wanted to keep back. Which basically that was the beginning of whenever people started taking pictures of animals individually and, trying to sell them online and stuff like that. So it's very, very early in, the online marketplace of leopard geckos, basically. 2005 is when Alberto got the first raptor. He bought it off of Ron. He was the first person in the world to have one in his collection other than Ron. And, even went down to Ron's place, picked it out, and, it was sent to Alberto. That was, 2005, right before the article in Reptiles magazine actually came out. Which, Ron and Alberto, had become friends before that. Alberto had visited Ron's place multiple times before that. So they were definitely, friendly. And, Ron would, talk about projects that he was working on and stuff like that. And Alberto would kind of, work with them on, kind of what was happening and stuff like that. Basically first got his first raptor, which is a Tremper Eclipse, as you all know. And that same year, Alberto purchased a 1.2 Super Snow from Alex Hugh, which basically they came from the Max, but Alex Hugh was kind of doing the brokering of all the snow stuff. So Alberto also, whenever he got the first raptor, he did get a couple Aptors, because if you remember back in time, the Aptor actually was marketed first, and then they just added the R for the red eye trait, which, they knew that the raptor existed, just nobody else in the world knew that it existed. And it was kind of a marketing thing to let's sell the Aptors first and then sell the raptors. So Alberto had that male raptor, a couple Aptors, and then a couple animals that came from that project that turned out to be Hetferaptor in the first place. So 2006, was the beginning of when I really started to get involved into the breeding on, a larger scale. Right before that, I'd been buying animals from Alberto, 2005, buying a lot of his jungle giants, and would be the first person at the show to pick out the best looking one. And, I had, a small collection of them. There was probably about 30. And then in 2006, that's whenever I had the condo fire. And, it wiped out basically everything that I had except for a few key animals. And that's whenever, the thing with Alberto really started to pick up as far as us working together. He basically took in my animals that had survived the fire, nursed them back to health. And then, kind of the midsummer to late summer of 2006 is whenever we really started working together and, decided to be business partners. And basically the deal was Alberto would give me the animals. I had to buy the racks and the food and take care of them. And then we would split the profit 50-50. So 2006, it was probably, I want to say a show in July or September. Basically Alberto gave me, actually it would have been the July show in 2006. I had already got a business location to kind of house the animals, and I bought the racks, had the racks put together, and the show in July, the White Plains show of July 2006 is whenever, I started to get some of these animals from Alberto, to raise up, basically, because in the middle of the breeding season is around that summertime thing. So he was already having to take care of a lot of babies. So he gave me everything that didn't sell at the show, and basically said, keep what you want, and anything you don't want, we'll take it to Daytona 2006, which is in August, and then we will, sell that stuff off, and then, get you some more animals. So right around that time is, as I'm taking care of these animals, I noticed the marble eye. And, I sent Alberto pictures. I was like, these things look really, really weird. So at that time, we actually did not have any, raptor like stuff that was actually hatching out. So because the animal that he had bought, really hadn't bred yet or anything like that. Basically we, took a look at these animals, took pictures of them, and kind of separated them out. He looked back because we had labeled basically all the animals that I had. He had labeled where they originally came from, as far as like tubs and stuff like that. So we knew what tub it came out of, and there was actually 3 of them, and all 3 of them were females, which kind of sucked because we didn't have a male, but we knew which male actually had produced them, which, ended up being good for, later on experiments and stuff like that. So back to, the 2006 stuff. 2006 is whenever I really started to acquire some of these animals for the breeding in 2007. So 2006, we went to Daytona. One of the key pickups that I made in 2006 was some Tremper Blazing Blizzards, which we'll touch on how that kind of comes into play later. And then I held back like quite a few different animals from Alberto, and kind of started getting into what I wanted to pair off and stuff like that. In 2006, Alberto actually hatched the first ever snow double het for raptor. He actually hatched out, I think it was like 7 animals. And basically what he had done was he bred the raptor male that he got from Ron originally, and he bred that to one of the super snow females that he had purchased. The other super snow female never bred. It's one of those things where the very first super snows were very weak. They were very small, and genetically they were just kind of, not really a mess, but like they just didn't really get to a size where they could breed. So from that one female bred to the raptor male, he'd gotten like, I want to say it was like 7 babies. There was, he had hatched out 3 males and the rest were girls. He had kept back all the girls, and he might have actually kept back the second male too, and then he gave me one of the males. So right off the bat, I was able to have a snow het for raptor before anyone else in the world. So that kind of puts us into 2007. And in 2007 was my first year really breeding leopard geckos, as far as breeding them commercially and, kind of having a larger collection to breed. That first year, I want to say there was probably, 50 to 60 females, maybe a little bit more. And what I had done was kind of planned out what I wanted to breed right off the bat, with the animals that I had, and kind of make stuff that would make sense going forward. The snow het for raptor male was instrumental in breeding a couple different things. At the time in 2007, there really wasn't a ton of different genetics out there. There was, patternless blizzard. There were giants were a big thing, jungle giants, and then the 3 strains of albino. I really, that first year, only worked with Tremper albinos, but I did have a couple Bell albinos that I'd gotten off of a guy that I had known from the White Plains reptile shows that was actually working with Bell albinos. So the first year that I bred stuff, I did one cross that was the snow Hetferaptor crossed to 6 Tremper Blazing Blizzards. The Tremper Blazing Blizzards that I got were actually they had pigmentation in their eyes, which is not uncommon for the Tremper Blazings to have like this black pigmentation in their eyes, basically. And I wanted to test breed the raptor against that to see if it was the same thing, because at that time nobody really had known. And then I also knew that Ron was working on the Diablo Blancos, or what he would later name the Diablo Blancos. So I wanted to have my own line of stuff that would be Diablo, like basically a Blizzard raptor, right whenever he would release it as well. So just from that one project, breeding those in 2007, I produced hets that were basically, there were 4 different things that I basically was hatching out of that grouping, which were snow Tremper albinos that were het for Blizzard, possible het for Eclipse, and then obviously the Trempers that were het for Blizzard and then possible het for Eclipse, and then the non-Tremper stuff. So it would be snows that were het for Blizzard and possible het for Eclipse, and they were het for Tremper as well. And then the non-snows that were basically het for Tremper Blizzard and possible het for Eclipse. Those animals were then bred in 2008 to produce some of the crazy combinations that I produced in 2008, which were basically Diablo Blancos, but they were actually also, some of them were snow Diablo Blancos. And then I was actually producing the first Blizzard Eclipses and snow Blizzard Eclipses that ever were a thing. Also that year I produced super snow versions of both of them, which was pretty crazy. And there wasn't a lot of talk about those in 2008, just because of the Enigma craze that happened in 2008. So going back to 2007, that is the year that the Enigmas really became a big thing, and a couple people had gotten Enigmas, and baby Enigmas were available at the Daytona of 2007. 2007, I picked up a few key animals at the Daytona show that really propelled 2008 into one of the craziest years of combinations that I ever really could get into. So basically, I had bought a Enigma that was het for Raptor, a Snow Enigma, a Bell Snow Enigma female. Those first 2 were males, by the way. So it was a male Enigma het for Raptor and a male Snow Enigma. That I'm pretty sure that it was actually het for Tremper as well. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that one was het for Tremper. So, and then those were their 2 males. The 2 major females that I got were a Super Snow Bell female and an Enigma Bell Snow female, which at the time, like, those were definitely high-notch animals. A lot of those were actually in trade for other animals that I'd produced in 2007, because I was producing, like, Mac Raptors, Mac Eclipses, Mac Patternless Stripes, and Mac Aptors, basically. So those were highly sought after, so that people could produce, Mac Raptors and Mac Eclipses. Then, at the same time, I'm still kind of working on the Marble Eye project in 2007. Basically, I bred the what we thought was the male to the visual Marble Eye stuff, and there was no visual Marble Eyes at that point, which kind of sucked. So I was like, well, I hatched out a male. Maybe I'll just breed those back to the moms that showed the Marble Eye. And then I could, see if, maybe the dad for some reason wasn't carrying it, or maybe that actually wasn't the dad. So, basically we tried to reproduce the Marble Eye in 2007. But it didn't happen. But what we did was we held back all of the babies from the pigmented parents, and then we used those the next year as basically hets, which would have been the 2008 season. Also in 2007 is whenever one of the only animals that survived the fire was an Eclipse male that originally had come from Ron Tremper. And I bought it from Alberto. It survived the fire, which is amazing in itself. And I used that animal to breed, to some other Eclipse or head Eclipses that were actually his daughters. Because before Alberto actually sold me the animal, he actually had bred it to some jungle type animals that he had. And produced these animals that we called number 22 females. Back then, we basically called things by number of what tubs they came out of, so we could better track where the stuff had come from. So basically, I had this Eclipse male and then some of his daughters. And then I also picked up those Bell females that in 2007 is whenever I bred that Eclipse male to the Bell females, and then I also crossed him back to his daughters, because I figured if I crossed him back to his daughters, that I would be able to see if there was any other. Honestly, probably back then I didn't even realize to see if there was Tremper in them or not, especially that year. But that's probably whenever I realized that he didn't have Tremper in him, because at that time, I was just trying to produce Raptors and Eclipses, because they were still so new in the hobby that they still were highly sought after. So I was like, oh, if I, cross this Eclipse to his daughters, and, I produce, Eclipses and head Eclipses from those. And then if I produce a Tremper or a Raptor, it's just, an extra bonus, honestly. And then, from breeding him back to 5 of his daughters, I didn't produce a single Tremper out of them. And then, that same year, I actually took him back to a Tremper albino that was head Eclipse or possible head Eclipse. And, I didn't get a single Tremper out of him as well from that grouping. And then since I had already crossed him into the Bell females, all of those Bell females crossed to the Eclipse babies were actually all held back, and that's what produced my first Raptor line, or radar line. I'm sorry, radar line. So as you can see from all of those breedings in 2007, it really set up the table in 2008 for a year that was just genetically crazy, honestly. Also in 2008, and actually it was probably 2007. Yeah, it was 2007. Probably picked him up at Daytona or another show in 2007. I also had picked up some snow patternless rainwaters because I wanted to start getting into rainwaters and maybe throw the Eclipse to it. And at that point of the year, I knew that my Eclipse male that I had was not het for anything. So it was basically discussed on the way to Daytona and on the way back with Alberto that because that Eclipse was not het for Tremper, we could actually put it into the other two strains of albino and then produce, both strains of albino eclipses. So that was all like discussed way back in, August of 2007 to actually do those projects. And we kind of joked about, once we, produced it in the rainwater or in any other strain, if we could get like all of the different genetics in, like the patternless, the Eclipse, the snow, the blizzard, we would call it because that would be it. That's all you could ever put into the animal was those genetics. So it became this elusive it project, which eventually I did get pretty close with the rainwater stuff, but that's further down the line. So that brings us into 2008, whenever I started doing crosses early because some of my females would usually ovulate in November, December. I could start breeding them, and I was hatching out babies in January, February, March, pretty regularly in those early days. And that's when, the first 2008 is whenever the first Dreamsicle was produced, the first Nova, the first Black Hole, and those were all produced basically from breeding that male Enigma het raptor that I gotten from the Daytona show to like an arsenal of females that were, either snow raptors or snow het for raptor or snow eclipses. Like I had all kinds of crazy stuff at that point to really breed that Enigma gene into everything on the Tremper side of stuff. So I did. That's whenever a lot of them got coined different names, and that's whenever the the gecko hobby as a whole was not very pleased with not only the speed at which it was done, but also the producing like all of these different crosses like very, very in quick progression of each other, basically. Because with the Dreamsicle, the Nova, and the Black Hole, all three of those were hatched out within 2 weeks of each other, I think. So it was a very crazy time where it almost seemed like every day there was like some new combination that I was posting on gecko forums and saying introducing the next new combination that we produced. And that pretty much continued most of 2008 with different projects that I'd set up in 2007, as far as like all these different blizzard crosses with the raptor, and I produced my first radars in 2008 as well. And then shortly after that, I was in 2008, I was actually, since I had the Super Snow Bell female and the Snow Bell Enigma, those were being bred to my pure Eclipse. So I was getting babies from those that the next year would produce like, Snow Radar Enigmas, and produce like very, very crazy stuff. So every year was basically, I was setting up for the next year. And, I was adding multiple genetics to these animals like every year. It wasn't like I was just doing them one at a time. I was putting like 2-3 genetic animals together with other 2-3 genetic animals and then hoping I hit the odds. 2008 is whenever I put the Eclipse male to the snow patternless rainwaters. And then the following year, and it was almost like every January I would come out with some crazy stuff because that nobody had even started working on. And, the January of 2009, the first ever typhoon was hatched out, and it was actually a patternless typhoon. And I remember like hatching it out, and I was like, well, I skipped a step, so do I really want to show the whole animal? And you can actually go on Geckos Unlimited and still find it if you search for typhoon. And the first picture of the first typhoon was actually just like a headshot. Like you couldn't even tell what the body looked like, because I didn't want to release really what it was, because I had skipped a step basically. And then, shortly after that, like the snow patternless typhoon was actually hatched out. And I actually hatched out the first patternless and snow patternless typhoon before the actual typhoon was actually even hatched out, which the typhoon would just be coined as the Eclipse rainwater. So, there was actually like 2 and 3 steps ahead was actually hatched before the typhoon was actually hatched. So that made it very, very interesting, very, very quickly, as far as like all of these different genetic combinations being, made within the course of like 2 years. And I think that's really how my name kind of got, put on the map, was because of coming up with all these different combinations in a very, very short amount of time. And they were, a lot of them were most of them were first of their kinds in the world. And, some of the stuff was, never even thought of before I was actually even producing them. So, so that was the first 2 years of breeding on a decent scale, was producing all these different combinations of animals and able to hold back, what I wanted to hold back from that stuff that would actually propel me in the years going forward. And that's honestly just from the genetic side of stuff. There's a lot of other projects that were polygenetic things that we had worked on and kind of made them better over the generations and stuff like that. Really, the G project was going on around the same time, and some other like really cool projects that Alberto and I were kind of we both had our own collections at the time, and we kind of were working on 2 totally different things. I think Alberto was working a lot more with polygenetic stuff and trying to make some cooler line bred stuff. I had my own line bred projects going on as well, but it wasn't until the collection really got put together that it all became kind of clear in what we really had as far as an overall collection and some of the cool stuff that we were working on.
Well, I hope everybody was taking notes because that was a ton of information. But yeah, it's just crazy to see how the stars fell into place and how you really set yourself up for that success, really, because you kind of were thinking not just 1, but like 2, 3, 4 years ahead to really get to that goal of, okay, I wanted to produce this animal, but really setting yourself up in the beginning genetically, and then also knowing what you had genetically, because during this time, a lot of people might have been taking shortcuts in terms of maybe crossing different albino strains and to get that animal. But the fact that you kind of were testing and, making sure that you had head-free animals and were doing things the right way, and then also getting to that point where you were making these crosses, and even though they were kind of long shot odds, but without doing the cross, you're never going to hit the odds. So going for those odds and then eventually hitting them at the end, you kind of set yourself up for that success by doing the things that you started doing in the beginning.
Yes, absolutely. And I think what people probably didn't realize at the beginning of all this stuff was, yeah, I might have started off with like a group of like a 1.1 or 1.2 or 1.3, but I held back every single animal. And so that first year that you have like three females, let's just say three females breeding, and you hold everything back, and always what we would do is we would always try to produce the male first, because the male is the most important thing. So what we would do is we would literally do these crosses, and a lot of these crosses, like, no matter what hatches out, it's going to be like a double or triple het, depending on what you're going for, because you're using the main building blocks. Like if like we'll use the the Typhoon project is a perfect example of this. So I knew that I wanted to have the Murphy's patternless in there, the snow, and the rainwater and the Eclipse. So by starting off with the male Eclipse by itself that was het free, and then breeding that to a snow patternless rainwater, you already know that every single baby that you produce is a triple het, like right off the bat. And then some of them are going to be snows, and then some of them are going to be normals, but they're all going to be triple het. So basically what I did was I made, I incubated the first, like, let's say 2 clutches were incubated from male, because, wanted to get a male that was a snow triple het. But then if I got a male that was just a triple het, that works out just as well. Because what I did with that project was I held back all of the babies that had hatched out, and it ended up being like a lot of animals. I want to say like, it was probably 12 to 20 animals. And I had at least 3 males that I can remember of that project. And I think I want to say that I gave away like a 4th male to like somebody as a pet, but I knew what it was. It's just I didn't want it out there in circulation. And basically what I did was I bred the snow males that I had to all the non-snow females that I had, because I did not want to get a super form and then not be able to tell if it had the eye pigmentation trait or not. So all of the snow males were bred to the non-snow female triple hets. And then the non-snow male was bred to all the snow triple het females. So right there, you're basically doing the same cross, only it's 2 different ways kind of thing. And then from there, you just have to like hope that you hit the odds. And I think the odds on hitting like the snow, Eclipse patternless rainwater, I think it's like 1 out of 128 or something like that. I did it one time, like as far as like what it actually was. But I want to say that like hitting that animal that I first hit that was the patternless rainwater Eclipse, I think that's 1 out of 64. Yeah, it's 1 out of 64. So the snow version's a 1 out of 28. So, I hit that on the 3rd egg. So it was just like a lot of luck that first one was made. And, because of how we would incubate everything right off the bat as male, that one was a male. And, as soon as I hatched it, everything after that went in the incubator as a female. So, and we just, hoped that like, by using the temperature sex incubation, that that first animal was definitely going to be a male, and he was. And I actually had him up to 60 grams, I think, in like 4 months. It was some crazy ridiculous thing where he was up to size very, very quickly. And I really think that that's because that first Eclipse male that was used, I'm pretty sure like it had the giant gene in it. And a lot of the stuff that I've used over the years, like, has had the gene in it, the giant gene, but we never really marketed the giant gene in a lot of our stuff just because of, we were always kind of torn whether it was like how genetic it really was. Like in our eyes, if you bred a big animal to a big animal, you got more big animals. And I think that's, over the years, I think that's more of what it is than a simple like, that there's a super form of the giant. Because if you think about it, like there would be, 150, 170 gram animals of every single genetic that's out there, and there's not. Like the only real huge ones are just strictly Tremper albinos. And so I think that, once other genes are added in there, like, and, normal sized geckos are added into that giant gene, like it just kind of slowly kind of brings them down in their size, no matter what you do to them. So to me, that's more of a polygenetic thing than it is that there's actually a super form of a giant. Like, that's just my opinion. That's what I've seen over the years. I'm sure you'll get people that'll argue that with me. But that's always how Alberto and I kind of have looked at the gene ever since we really started working with it. And I used to own Moose, the original super giant's full brother. His name was Mammoth. I had him for years, and I bred him, and his kids would be like long and lanky, but there was never any of his babies would get even close to how big he was. So I think if you don't have large females to breed to that large male, like you end up like getting smaller and smaller animals again. So that's just how I've always looked at it. But anyway, back to the genes and stuff like that, and like making these crosses. You just have to hit the odds basically, and the more you can, more babies you can make from these crosses. And we were making a lot of animals from these crosses because you get 3 males and close to probably, I mean, there was probably 15 females just in that project. You take that times like anywhere from like 8 to 10 eggs per female, you're making a lot of extra babies basically. But we did a lot of shows, and everybody wants a pet animal, and a lot of those possible triple het for typhoon animals, like they got sold as pets to people, because they weren't genetically anything to look at. So we ended up selling a lot of those off in a lot of these projects as pets to people, which is also another interesting thing, is that they were floating around for sure. And it's not like we didn't tell people. It's just that a lot of times we would even say, hey, it's like het for this or het for that. But it was one of those things where they were all possible hets. So you might have got an animal that was het for Eclipse, but not het for the other 2 things. So it was because all the babies that were produced at that point would have been 66% hets, because it was triple het to triple het. So you might have gotten one or all, or none of it being het for certain things. So we would try to. And most of the time, people that were buying them as pets, they were kind of ignorant to that stuff anyway, so they didn't really care. They were just like, "Oh, mommy, this animal's cool. Can I have it?" And we'd be like,
Right.
Here's, take your $40, and yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, so that kind of gets us to through the 2007 2008 season, and kind of sets us up for the 2009ish. Time frame. And I think that's really when with the Enigmas being what they were, which like in 2008, like I produced a ton of them, of all different flavors and colors, and kind of probably the unsung animal, that because I was producing stuff that was so much more genetically advanced, like the snow Enigma that I'd gotten, whenever I produced just like regular, super snow Enigmas, like it really wasn't that big of a deal, because, I'd already been producing like the dreamsicles. So, I did produce those kind of things in 2008 as well. And then, we started really noticing like how bad of issues were coming out of the Enigmas around 2008 and 2009ish. And I think by 2009, like I was already like not breeding them. It was one of those things where we've already made all these combinations. We've kind of seen what it's doing to the animals, not only from a visual standpoint, but from a standpoint of their health and stuff like that. And there were definitely animals back in the early time frame of breeding Enigmas that they would just fail to thrive. They would get up to like 20 grams and like literally just waste away, and it was heartbreaking, honestly, because you'd get these animals and they would look so amazing. I mean, they're next to probably the lemon frost stuff, and it's probably arguable either way which one produces the craziest looking animal. I would say like I think lemon frost really never got a chance to get off the ground as far as like producing crazy looking animals, because I'm sure it could have, depending on what cross. But after doing all of the crosses with the Enigmas, and seeing how crazy some of that stuff really was, it was, they made beautiful animals. It's just the downside of doing that was the Enigma syndrome and the wasting away of some of the babies. And it seemed like the more genetics you put into an animal, like kind of the weaker they were. We even tried like outcrossing it to some of the subspecies like the Afghanicus and Fasciolatus and stuff like that. And that just didn't really seem to help too much once you started stacking genetics and stuff. So, I think it was, whenever, because in 2007, I got out of the Army in the summer of 2007, moved back to Pennsylvania, lived in Pennsylvania for a year, and then it was shortly after the Daytona show in 2008 is whenever I moved in with Alberto for a year. And we still had some Enigmas then. That's actually whenever the videos really first started, is in 2008. And I think we, hopefully, depending on what order you guys listen to this, you'll hear the story of, how I was no longer involved with like gecko forums. And that's how the videos first had started. And then in 2009, I moved back to Pennsylvania, and basically, 2008, whenever I moved in with Alberto, we kind of put the collection together and then kind of, weeded out what projects we weren't going to have and stuff like that. And then 2009 is basically whenever I was like, yeah, I don't really want to work with these Enigmas anymore. And since I had the whole collection, that's whenever there was definitely that gutting of the collection. And basically, it was twofolds. It was one, that's whenever I really started to understand, having these hidden genetics and stuff, and I didn't want that in my collection, because of all the work that I'd done on making these crosses. That's whenever I really understood how like these hidden hets could really, really screw you up later. Whenever you start working with triple hets and stuff like that, like you see how like almost hard it is to get them back out if you wanted to take them out. It's very easy to put them in. It's very, very hard to take them back out. Because I was seeing, trying to get the odds on putting them together, and then now try to imagine trying to take out these hets that you can't see. And then you have to like, breed all these babies back to, something to see if that het is in there anywhere. And that to me just started to, it took this turn where, if I tried to take these hets out, how many extra animals would I have to produce every year just to prove them out? And, I had at that point gotten in contact with somebody that worked at Mark Bell's facility that was the gecko manager, and kind of told me a little bit more about the Enigma and what they were kind of doing with it down there, and how it got kind of mixed up into other lines of albino and stuff like that. And that basically sold it on me that, like, I don't want these things in my collection, and I don't want any siblings from Enigma projects in my collection. So, keeping the records that I did, and all of it was really on tubs and stuff like that. It wasn't really like written down anywhere or anything like that. It was just on tubs, and I knew where a lot of the animals, what their parents were and stuff like that, because I was always writing that on the tubs and what kind of, projects they came from. That's whenever I was able to literally kind of gut the collection of all of the Enigmas and Enigma siblings, and kind of go back to animals that had been born back in like 2006, 7, and 8. That did not have. And then, so basically, I created all of these different genetic combinations, and then literally gutted my collection of all of it to get back to a collection that didn't have Enigma stuff in it whatsoever. And, I'll touch on the, talking with the person from Mark Bell's facility. He had told me that they originally thought that the Bell Enigmas were actually the super form, and they were breeding those to everything. And we're talking about like Tremper blazing, like, patternless, all this other crazy stuff, colorful animals, Bell animals. So imagine thinking that an albino is the super form of something, and you're breeding that to everything, including other strains of albino. And it was just like, well, that's got to be a genetic mess. So that's what, definitely pushed me into, kind of retooling the collection in 2009. And then by 2010, like, it was totally free of all of that stuff.
That's crazy, just to like see how everything really connects, like connecting the dots, and going to that collection and seeing, okay, because Bells and Enigmas popped out of the same place. They all came out of Mark Bell stuff. So knowing that those were paired together, and if you wanted to cross it into like the Tremper stuff, knowing that even before that, knowing that you'd have to test to see if it was Bell and even Eclipse probably before you wanted to cross that into any of the Tremper stuff and even Rainwaters down the line.
And the kind of the scary part was those first Enigmas that were sold, nobody was able to buy a male Enigma back in 2000. It would have been 2000, the end of 2006, early 2007. The only Enigmas that were for sale were females. So you couldn't even test breed out those females before crossing them into things. So, it's a very real possibility. And I will never know. And I don't think anybody else will ever know about their original Enigmas if they were het for Bell and stuff like that. So it is a very real possibility that those original Dreamsicles and stuff like that, they could have been possible het for Bell, because nobody ever tested for it back then. It wasn't really a thing. And it's like I said with the crossing of that original het Eclipse male back to his daughters, like that was looking back at it, that was more to produce more Eclipses and more raptors. That wasn't really to see if it was het, which it ended up being a good thing for me down the line. But it's not something that back in 2006, 7 we thought about, honestly. Because did we still frown upon crossing the albinos? Absolutely. But it wasn't one of those things that was even really thought about when doing the crosses to get combinations, I think, at the time. And I think that's where some older school breeders that were trying to make like the radars and stuff like that. They, in a way, you don't want to fault them because like you're not sure if they knew if it was wrong, if that makes sense, or they knew that that's going to create problems later down the line whenever you're breeding those animals back to each other and you pop out a different strain of albino. I don't, does it make those animals dirty? Absolutely. Or possibly dirty if they were or not. But does that make the people originally guilty of, knowing that it was in there? If they knew that it was in there, then it definitely makes them guilty. If they didn't know that it was in there or like didn't really understand it, it's one of those like weird question mark things, if that makes sense, because it was almost like it was a practice that kind of started after certain things were already done. So, it was one of those things where I really started to preach it, I want to say in 2009, 2010. But, back in 2007, I don't know if it was really thought about that way. Because if you look at like the ball python industry, for instance, and, you get an animal that you breed and it, was, het for albino or het for pied and you didn't know it, and that was just kind of an added bonus, people would be like, oh, that's awesome. But like, in leopard geckos, it was one of those things like that. I think I was really the first one that, made it this cautionary tale of, well, that's not always a good thing to have an extra head in there. And I still think ball pythons in a way are, it's still like kind of cool if it has an extra head in it, like it's almost like you get something for free. Where in leopard geckos, because of the 3 different strains of albino, it's definitely more frowned upon because you don't want to mix those. Like, I think the same thing could have been said for like, I think it's like candy and albino and ball pythons, where, that's the candinos. And once they're crossed, you can't tell if they're candy or if they're albino. But it's never one of those things where like people frown upon them, you know what I mean? Because to them it's still an albino. So it's one of these weird things that even in different species, working with these genetics, like it's looked upon differently. And what's the best answer for it? I mean, I don't know. I definitely like to keep my albino strains like separated and know what's what and not have possible hets. And I feel like the rest of the leopard gecko community is like that now, or for the most part they are. But other species that have different strains of albino, they might not look at it the same way. I would think that like maybe the boa community, because of the different lines of albino red tails and stuff like that, they might be a little bit more interested in making sure that they're not like that. But, I'm not part of that community, so I don't know what their feelings are on that, actually. And it's, you bring up a great point where there's so many multiple types of eye pigmentations and different types of snows and stuff like that. I think that we're very unique as leopard gecko hobbyists that we do have so many genes that are so closely kind of related but not related. I don't really think that there's any other, hobby or industry that's really like that.
Now, going back to like some of the things that you were doing with these crosses and a little bit about how you went about doing these crosses, how are you able to, still make these super incredible combinations and going for these really awesome leopard gecko morphs and stacking genes on top of each other, but also making sure that you're keeping these clean lines and then also testing at the same time and kind of going about doing these things?
We had actually talked about this a little bit before we actually did this episode, and I showed you a picture of how the 2007 breeding season actually happened, and I had actually had note cards, and then of the different groups of females that I wanted to breed, and then on each note card, I would use a color for which male I wanted to breed with them, and then on my racks, like basically each tub would have the color of the male that I was using, and then a number. And then whenever I would put the animals in the incubator, above the eggs would be a number in a specific color. And I would use Sharpie, and just by looking at that number, I could tell you exactly what females it came out of, and my females would always be the same exact genetic whenever I put them in a tub together. And that was.
I'm sorry. It just started snowing outside. Oh my gosh. I'm sorry. Keep going.
Welcome to Evan's first time with snow, because
oh my gosh.
Welcome to Wisconsin, dude. Welcome to your life for the next 6 months, probably.
Holy crap. I'm sorry. Keep going, dude. My bad.
No, it's all right. We're all gonna laugh about this whenever we hear this episode.
I know.
Evan's first experience in the snow.
I know. It's all captured on audio. You guys can have this for decades to hear.
And you're not going to hear him for the next 10 minutes because he's out building a snowman because it's his first time in the snow.
I know. Snow angels and snowball
yeah,
hearts.
Really.
And then I'm going to probably get over it and hate that it's 20 degrees outside and it's snowing walking to class.
Yeah. Just wait till you have to shovel it or drive in it. Yeah, you'll be. It's pretty the first time you see it, and then after that, you're just like, okay, it can go away. But
sorry, keep going.
No, it's all right. All right. So, so basically, that first year, I kind of came up with a system of, colored numbers. And then after that, it really just was in my head. There were certain markers on certain tubs, like abbreviations of stuff. But if you were to come into my gecko collection, you would not be able to tell what genetics were what and anything about it. And honestly, that was done by design once it started to get bigger. I would know what things were. I would know what the marks meant, but I did everything in code in case anybody ever tried to come and steal my stuff. And I know that that's really, really crazy and really kind of out there. But I had a friend that somebody broke into his house and stole most of his collection of knobtails. And, they shot his dog, and it was craziness. So after that, after hearing that and realizing, how big of a collection and how much advanced it was and stuff like that, I really started to adopt a practice where, if anyone random came in there, they would have no clue what anything was. And it was kind of awesome because, especially whenever I was doing all these crosses that were triple hets and double hets and stuff like that, they all looked like normals. So no one would ever be able to tell what they were. And, I did everything in kind of a pattern that I knew but no one else knew. And it's just one of those things where you work with these animals every day, you can tell individuals apart, and I can definitely do that. And it's one of these really weird things that I've kind of been blessed with, I guess, in my life, where if I have a wall of 600 geckos, I could literally, if you asked me where one was, I could point out exactly where it was, what its grandparents were, what its great grandparents were, and literally give you a full rundown of the history of the animal, and probably go through my picture library that I have of, there's probably at least 15,000 gecko pictures that I have. I could probably
even on your Facebook, it's you have so many geckos on there. It's you can have a visual kind of record of some of the things that you produced, and then with all the albums you could really see just from your Facebook a little piece of your collection, and then how you kind of organize things, and how you're able to keep track of things.
Yeah, exactly. And honestly, just what's on the Facebook page is probably only about 10% of what I have, captured on in pictures, which is even crazier. There's a lot of stuff very early, before I really made the Facebook page, like the years that we're talking about, like between 2006, 7, 8, and even 9. Then that was before my Facebook page was even up. So, I mean, the Facebook page doesn't even have, I don't think, any of the Enigma stuff on it whatsoever. Like all that stuff happened at, like, my Facebook page happened after my retooling of the collection, because it's whenever I took over the collection totally. So that actually even makes a whole nother, like, yeah, if you think about what all is on the Facebook page itself, and then think that it actually missed probably my 4 most prolific years, like that even says something right there. Like it's one of those crazy things where, there's so much more that's not even out there, honestly.
And I think that goes just to a little bit about some of the stuff that you're doing, because I feel like with you, the reason why I think you were really popular when you were really into leopard geckos is how you kind of did things a little bit differently than everybody else, not only in terms of genetics, but also using the internet and social media to be on your side when you're capturing things and showing a little bit of insight into kind of your life and how you did things over at your collection. So capturing some of that stuff, and then also being able to tell people and explain people how you kind of did things, and how, with the Raptor stuff with Alberto, and then going on to Enigmas and, Typhoon stuff later down the line, you were able to capture that stuff and then also show, like, pretty much step by step, because you knew your animals, you knew your collection, how you went to go and have success in these things later down the line.
Yeah, absolutely. And because of leopard geckos being so prolific, in a certain aspect, I was able to retool my collection, really like 3 times. And we were talking about this earlier on the phone, but there was definitely a retooling after, I made the Enigmas, and then there was another retooling. The market got really soft in leopard geckos one of the years, and I actually, did a huge trade with the Urban Gecko, to get some of the fat tails that they were working on at the time. And I literally got, I had posted a picture on my Facebook at one point. I think it was my personal Facebook, honestly. And I said, if a picture is worth 1,000 words, this picture is worth $30 a word or something like that, because it was a tub of fat tails that literally there was a male of every single genetic that had been out there, base genetic at the time. So we're talking like, whiteouts, whiteout patternless, Oreos, ghosts, both strains of amel, if you will, like the caramel and the regular amels. And then like there was females of a lot of that stuff too, and hets. And because I did a big deal with the Urban Gecko, that's how their collection became so diverse with different things that they were working on, honestly. So that was definitely another retooling of the collection at that point, because I turned a lot of my gecko racks into fat tail racks at that point. And kind of, it was just kind of, I was like kind of getting burnt out of leopard geckos a little bit, so I wanted to get into some other things, and fat tails looked kind of promising. So what I did was, I traded for all these fat tails, and then I knew an importer that was getting in. Well, honestly, the importer that I was getting my fat tails from, and I was getting like adult females for like $10 a piece. was the one that was bringing in all these mutations of fat tails and basically selling them to the highest bidder. And that usually was either Urban Gecko or JMG. And so, I was buying these adult female fat tails for $10, throwing them in with, morph males and getting, these heads. And, I was able to produce some, but fat tails are definitely harder to mass produce than leopard geckos. And it was one of those things where they just didn't really do it for me. And I got an offer to get into the hard wiki. The guy that produced the first captive bred hard wiki in the world, he made me an offer for a large group of hard wiki. So I ended up selling all of the fat tails to raise money for the group of hard wiki. And then that's whenever, I had gotten into the hard wiki at the time. I'd have to go back and look when I actually got the hard wiki. I want to say it was 2011-ish. Probably 2011 is whenever I got them. I'd have to look on, the Sasovec Facebook page. Let me see if I do that while I'm actually on here real quick, and then I can give you a better timeline of when that actually happened. Because it was shortly after I got them that I had really posted pictures of them in a way. Over the years, I've definitely got into different types of geckos and gotten out of different types of geckos. I've went through some of the different knobtail geckos and some of the Diplodactylus, Australian species stuff. I've bred a bunch of cave geckos, because working on, a lot of leopard geckos all the time, you kind of get tired of the same species sometimes. So I got my first hard wiki in 2011. I hatched my first one in 2012 by the looks of it, according to the Facebook page. And that sounds about right. I probably got the fat tails in 2010-ish. And, that honestly makes a little bit more sense too, because a lot of the, well, not a lot of the animals, but some of the animals that, whenever I was retooling the collection from the Enigmas, some of that stuff went up to the Urban Gecko. So that makes a lot of sense time frame wise when when I was doing that.
When you were going sort of through these kind of changes in your collection, when you were getting rid of things and adding new things, did you see your vision kind of changing in terms of what you wanted to produce with not only leopard geckos, but other geckos, and then with leopard geckos, like some of the morphs and kind of projects that you were trying to do over in your collection?
Yeah, I think it was honestly in a constant state of changing. And it was really just because of, what I wanted to do. And, I think if you're not constantly changing your collection, you're almost doing yourself a disservice because, a lot of times, you'll have, things kind of go in and out of style, if that makes sense. And, the market will definitely go through its peaks and valleys for certain things. And, you're always constantly, or you should always be constantly looking out for, what is going to, what are people going to want next kind of thing. And, it's one of those things where, you kind of have to be looking in advance of what you think is going to become popular. And almost part of your job is, being a business person and working on social media and stuff like that is kind of, stating your case of why that should become popular. With my Facebook page and like influence, as I guess you could kind of say I was an influencer before influencer was like a thing, is like because of my YouTube channel and my Facebook page and stuff like that, I feel like I was very able to like influence people into what looked cool and what, was kind of going on at the time. And you almost kind of have to stay ahead of all of that, if that makes sense, where, what you want to produce and what you want to do. And then it's almost like you got to make it and then make it seem cool. We had definitely talked briefly about whenever I got the white and yellows in and then started producing them. So I got the first white and yellows. I'm actually looking at like the album that I have on my personal page of whenever they first came in. So I got them in September of 2009. It was actually September 23rd, 2009. And that was before anyone else in the US had them. And I started making crosses in 2010. And then 2010, like, some of them sold, but like it wasn't really like a big thing yet. So it was one of those things where, after making these cool combinations and crosses and stuff like that, then is whenever you kind of have to start marketing white and yellow as, or in my case at this time, kind of had to market white and yellows to become a little bit more popular than what, become more popular in people's eyes, basically. And, that first year, like white and yellow, like that I had white and yellows that I'd actually produced, there wasn't a whole lot of, fanfare about them or anything like that. Nobody was really, beating down my door for, white and yellows. So that would have been 2010. And then 2011 is whenever they definitely started to gain more popularity. And then I think 2012 was like, the big year type of thing. That's whenever, I probably had my best year was in 2012. And then that was right before, a couple years before the collapse of everything. So, it's like we kind of talked about this a little bit. It would be interesting to see what would have happened in those, let's say 6 years, if I was able to keep producing on the trajectory that I was. And it would have been interesting to see, like, where my focus would have went to in producing leopard geckos, if I still would have been producing leopard geckos. It's one of those really interesting things where, you never really know what could have happened. Could my lines have been even crazier? Which it probably, just from like line breeding, I'd be kind of disappointed in myself if they weren't. But it's a very interesting thing to think about. Just from the little bit of what I was just telling you all about is, a lot happened. So given another 6 years, it would be very, very interesting to see what happened.
Basically, on the trajectory you were going and some of the stuff that you were doing when you were doing the breeding stuff with the Leos, it wasn't easy stuff with in terms of marketing, and then also some of the combos that you were making, not only like some of the morphs, but also like the line bred stuff. Earlier, we were kind of talking about your G Project stuff and kind of the trajectory that took, and really getting people to really appreciate it for what it was, and some of the things that you were doing with that project, which was super awesome. It really takes a lot more than I think what a lot of people see when
you think people just want to become a leopard gecko breeder and make some cool stuff. It's not only that, but there's a lot that goes into making stuff, and then also making people appreciate some of the stuff that you're making. It's not an easy thing to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And definitely the G project, was, I had worked on it for a long, long time, and it was one of those projects which I kind of always liked it, and I'm probably the one that coined the word project whenever talking about like line bred traits, and to me it was one of those things that was never finished, and it was one of those things where I wanted to make it look different all the time. And that's why I kind of called it a project, is because like there was no set trajectory on it. It was just like, I want to make the coolest looking leopard gecko that I could. And, the project really started with animals that I'd gotten from Alberto, and kind of a little bit of a history on like the G project stuff was, it definitely has, Jungle Giant in it, and it definitely had some HQ red stripes in it, which that's basically high quality, or I think they called it like HQ reptiles was like high quality reptiles, and they had some red stripes, and their red stripes were the best in the world back in like 2004-3 time frame. And honestly, like if those red stripes were still around today, like they would still blow away a lot of people's animals. Like we're talking about animals that had like full carrot tail and had like red stripes going down their back. They were amazing animals, and it's kind of sad that you don't see really anything even like them anymore. And maybe like, I should post some pictures of, actually, I think on the Sasobek reptile page, there are some pictures of, old school lines of things. And I think I even put like some of that stuff on the page somewhere. But anyway, Alberto basically was using those and crossing those into, Jungle Giants, and he was kind of producing his own apters at the time that we called patternless stripes. And patternless stripes were basically just apters that were not albino. And, it was kind of one of those things where, Alberto was basically trying to reverse engineer how the raptor was actually made. And he actually did do it, and he figured out how Ron was able to actually make the raptors and apters and stuff like that. And it basically was, whenever you cross a stripe with a reverse stripe, sometimes you'll get animals that are what we considered patternless stripes, which basically didn't have any, specific reverse or stripe to them. And it was almost like the stripes were kind of overlaying on top of each other. And basically those animals were the ones that we bred those together, and we, produced our own raptors from those. So we always thought that, that is how Ron was able to produce the raptors in the first place. So we kind of wanted to work on line breeding like those byproduct animals. And that's kind of what, Alberto started doing. And then I kind of like took over and, really started calling it my G project. The other thing that we kind of tossed into there, and what, I kind of used for a couple different things was, whenever Alberto first got the first raptor, is also whenever he was importing the first ever Afghanicus from Europe. And the Afghanicus that we had gotten, which, any of the true Afghanicus are just like a very, very miniature leopard gecko. They don't get as big. Some of them now will be a good size, but back then they were like, 35, 40 grams was really as big as they would get. And basically Alberto wanted to produce basically Ron was producing all this giant stuff. So Alberto was like, I want to produce micro geckos. And that's what he always called them, was micro geckos. And so he basically wanted to produce small raptors. And he crossed a male Afghanicus to a female raptor. And that female raptor ended up producing like so many freaking eggs. It was probably the most prolific female I think I've ever seen, and probably he could say the same thing. She produced like close to 20 babies by herself. And basically all of those animals that were produced from that pairing we called Afra, which basically just stood for Afghanicus raptors. And that was just kind of, what Alberto called them to like kind of, know that they were different. And they all kind of looked normalish. They had a little bit of color to them, but it wasn't anything crazy. But it was whenever you bred those animals back to each other, is you would get all sorts of craziness happen. Because of the higher contrast of an Afghanicus, you would actually get more high contrast, like patternless stripes and, apters and stuff like that. So we used a lot of those kind of genetics in it as well. And that's one of the reasons why my G Project stuff, for a lot of people that ever have worked with it, especially if it came from me, they were a very hardy and strong line, because we did outcross them with, Afghanicus, and they did have some jungle giant in them and stuff like that. But like, we never really called them or said that either one of those two things was really in the line, but it definitely was. And it's, at what percentage, nobody really ever knows, and we really didn't even know, because we would just take the coolest looking ones, kind of breed them together, and then kind of go for looks that we wanted. Like, for a long time, I had one male that was called CT that just stood for carrot tail. And I mean, he had 100% carrot tail. So like any animal that I bred him to, would produce animals with high carrot tail. And if I would breed him back to his daughters, like they would all be 100% carrot tail. So a lot of like my Solar Raptor line and a lot of the G Project stuff actually did have, they were animals from him. And, he was one of, the founding, males that I had used for a lot of that stuff. And, the G Project always kind of would have like a specific look to it, even though I would slightly change it like here and there. The G Project would always be, very, very high contrast, or like very, very patternless stripe, but it would also have a lot of carrot tail to it. And depending on what females or, what males or females you used, it would give you a wide variety of stuff going forward, depending on what you wanted to cross it to. So that's what also made the line very, very cool, is depending if you wanted to make it bolder, you could easily make it bolder. If you wanted to make it more, the same color, almost like a hypo, then you could do that as well. So it was all kind of in there. And that's what made the project so unique, was that like, depending on, what animals from the project you used, you could make the babies look totally different. And, kind of, once the G Project became, pretty well known, then you started seeing like kind of like knockoffs of it, where it would be like, you would take one animal was a G Project, or like there would be like a, the G Project definitely had like its really, really nice ones. And then there was ones that were like, they still came from the line, but they weren't, crazy good examples of it. And, you'd get people that would get like, mediocre examples of it. And then they would cross that to, some random gecko, and they would still try to market the babies as G Project babies. And, after seeing that for, a while, I was kind of like, like this isn't what the name of, they're still technically from a G Project animal, kind of, but it's not what I was going for with them.
At that
You know
point,
what I
it's a cross, and especially if
mean?
it was to a subpar animal, then it's not doing the line any good.
Yeah, exactly. And there was a lot of people that were making these crosses and, kind of diminishing the name of it, I guess. And that's whenever like I kind of, switched from I wanted to make them definitely more high contrast, and kind of because of males that I was using, they became more high contrast, but the carrot tail wasn't as crazy on them, because I was using more of like a tangerine like line. So going back to what we had said about like the different types of carrot tail, the tangerine line that I was using kind of took away the red stripe carrot tail from some of the animals. And that's whenever the clown project really became a thing. It was actually G project animals, but I used a specific male that actually came from the electric line of animals, and that is what really created the clown project stuff. And there's definitely a secret meaning to the project, and the male that I used, like what his name was, and it pays a probably an inappropriate homage to the originator of the line that but it was definitely out of joking in a way, but still some slight bit of bitterness, and it was one of those things that I just never really publicly said what it was all about and stuff like that. But
I want
I
people
thought,
to guess to see what they think it is, because I feel like no one would ever have that
Yeah.
idea of what the actual meaning behind some of this stuff means.
yeah, and that's I don't know if we talked about that in episode 1 or not. A lot of my stuff does have some hidden meanings to certain reasons why I named stuff certain things, and it was a lot of it's very, very playful, but it's weird because it's like playful in a way that like no one else would understand other than me, and people just think that it's cool names, but there's actually a lot of meaning behind a lot of the names. And it's funny because like even like the G project, for instance, a lot of people were like, oh, it means green, and it really doesn't mean green. It was just did they have a greener hue whenever like I was working on it, and that one of the reasons why I was kind of working on it in a specific way? Yes, but like G project actually doesn't mean green at all. Like it, I mean, honestly, like it's actually based off of a Gatorade commercial, and it was just like it's whenever Gatorade stopped calling themselves Gatorade and it just went to G. I was like that's pretty gangsta. So like I'm just gonna go with like just a straight letter, and that's really what it is. But it's funny because if you go on like websites like I think even Urban Gecko at one point, like it was telling about morphs and stuff like that, and they say that, or on there it was like, oh yeah, the G project is a a project that originated from like somebody in the US and it means green, and I'm like, no, it actually doesn't.
Yeah.
But however what you want to market my animals, it's cool. But so it's kind of funny like that, where there's definitely certain things that mean certain things to me, but they might not mean anything to anybody else. Like whenever I named the universe, that was definitely, it was right after, Ron had released the AKA Galaxy. And, in a way, it kind of upset me a little bit that he like renamed something that my mentor had already created and had a name for. So, it was kind of like oh, like you think you're cool for making that, but in all reality, you're about 5 years late. So here's the new version of it. And it wasn't like, me being mad at Ron or anything like that. It was just like, again, like a playful thing of like, you thought you created something new, but actually, like, there's people out there that are much more advanced than you are at this point. And, like I said, Alberto made the first Super Snow Eclipse. He called it a total eclipse. And, he made those. Oh, geez, it probably was 2007, I think he made the first one. Because, yeah, that probably would have been about right. It was 2007. He made the first total eclipse. And it had the blue spot on the top of the head and everything. All it didn't have was the paradox sunspot, which like not all galaxies have in the first place. So, but Alberto was the first one to ever cross the Raptors with the Max Snow. And from those babies, he produced the first Super Snow Eclipse ever, and that was back in 2007. Which is kind of crazy because like even up until years later there really wasn't a whole lot of those out there. So for him to have the the kind of he was mentally thinking way in advance of how to do things, and I definitely picked that up from him, where you got to be thinking about projects way in advance, and not just kind of like randomly putting stuff together. You kind of have to have a direction of where you want to put things and how you want to do things.
And just to cap off this episode, from kind of your mentality and kind of the way that you thought of things, was there anything in specific that really brought you to a certain animal or something else where you got inspiration to kind of go the direction on some of the animals you had, especially because you had kind of a lot of, it wasn't just like you were known for one thing. You kind of had a lot of different things that you were known for, a very diverse collection. So was there anything that you used to kind of get inspiration and go that direction with the projects that you had when you were really into the gecko stuff and breeding at the time?
Honestly, like, not really, I don't think. I think I was always more driven to, try to have, I always said that I wanted to have the pound for pound best collection in the world. And, I think, I accomplished that at one point for sure. Because it's one of those things where like I never wanted to have like the largest collection in the world because like, there's wholesalers that have that, so in in making like, quote unquote, the pound for pound best collection in the world, like it basically turned into this like huge genetic library. And I almost feel like I wanted to pay homage to the people that came before me, before that was even a thing too, where, I wanted to, have all these different lines of things before people even realized like, what they were. Because I think in a way I always felt like I knew that, after seeing what happened to some of my projects, that like once it's gone, it's gone. You know what I mean? Once you outcross it and turn it into something else, like it's never the same. So I think that, what really, did that for me originally was Alberto's Jungle Giants, which really got me into leopard geckos in the first place. Because his original Jungle Giants, I mean, they were impressive. And, still to this day, there is not animals out there that are like what he used to have. And, that's crazy because that was like, 15 years ago. And to have animals that were like such high contrast and then have like these really orange heads and like this huge amount of carrot tail going down their tails, like it was just, like if I could have a collection of just those today, I would, because they're just so unique and so different. And I'm actually looking at a couple pictures of them right now that are on my Facebook page. That if you go to A&M old school lines, there's pictures of some of that stuff up there, and it's just like they were just totally different for their time and haven't been done since. And it's, it's one of those things where, I always wanted to have a very, very diverse collection of stuff that, and I kind of saw this from, not only a personal side, but a marketing side, to have all these different things. It's almost like a one-stop shop, because like, if anybody has ever vended a show and sold leopard geckos at a show, it never fails that at least one person will come up to you and ask you for something that you don't have. And it was one of those things where like I wanted to literally have everything. And for up and right towards the end of whenever I got out, I probably did have everything, or at least everything that I wanted. I didn't have Enigmas at the time, but I don't think a whole lot of other people were working on them either. But it's one of those things where I had worked on them in the past. So it was, there was never like a motivation of really, what I wanted to do with my projects. I would say the biggest motivator, other than like, having the coolest collection in the world, was my family, actually. And not in a good way. Like my family, literally was like, why are you into these reptiles? Like you need to like, grow up and get a job and not do these. And, it was one of those things where like, they just never understood what like it was about. And, and it kind of sucks in a way where to them, the biggest thing was, are you making money doing it? And, it's always great to be able to like turn your hobby into something that you make money for. But that was never really my motivation in doing it, was to make all this money, because you're never going to be a millionaire. Like, can you live slightly comfortably breeding leopard geckos? Yes. But you're not going to be a millionaire. Like it's leopard geckos. Like it's, unless you come out with some new mutation and literally you just like strike it, like, just that 1 or 2 years that you can do it and you make all your money and you cash out, that's the only way you might even become close. Or, you become a YouTube star, talking about your leopard geckos. That could be the other reason that you do really, really well. But as far as like actually breeding them and selling them, it's, you can make a living off of it and live decently, but you're not going to, do that in New York City or anything like that. You got to live in a part of the country where it's a little bit cheaper to live. So, that was a big motivator for me as well, was, people in my family being like, you're dumb for doing this. And I remember the one day that I took my, my grandmother to a show, and she got to, and this was probably like, 2012 or so, like whenever I was doing pretty well, and, was popular because of YouTube and Facebook and stuff like that. And, she was just amazed. And it wasn't even like a big show like Daytona or Chicago. It was like the White Plains show in New York. She saw how hard I worked at the show, and like saw all the people coming up and talking to me and knowing who I was and stuff like that. And, then the car ride, back to the house, me, handing her a few dollars, that really, definitely kind of shut her up, as far as, and not shut up in a bad way, but like she definitely respected what I did after that. And that was probably the best thing that leopard geckos really, that was probably the most proud that I've ever felt. Let's put it that way. Kind of proving, a family member wrong on what I was doing, and, and she was legitimately, she was proud of me. And, that was probably the most, the best feeling that I've had with leopard geckos. And, there's always like, it's been cool to produce the world's first of things and stuff like that. But to be recognized by a family member for your achievement is special for sure. Because you're always going to get people that are like, oh, you produce really cool stuff, and and I appreciate all of that. But whenever you can turn somebody's opinion around, that's always more special, especially whenever it comes from a family member.
Wow, that's just really powerful to hear that. Didn't really matter kind of all the stuff you were doing outside, like forget about the YouTube and the Facebook and kind of the notoriety you got from that, but kind of just hearing that from your family member and then hearing that kind of the stuff that you were doing after they're showing you off for all those years, like why are you breeding these stupid geckos, like it's pointless or whatever, kind of having that sense of being proud and having that like kind of all this stuff being worth it at the end. That's really great to hear.
Yeah, and it was it was definitely interesting for sure. Like, and that was really cool for that to have happened. And because that was, at that point, that was after years of work. And it kind of made all those years worth it, of all the sacrifice and stuff like that. And I think that's the other thing that people don't realize, is the amount of sacrifice that some of these breeders have put into their animals. I mean, there's a lot of growing pains that goes through any breeder that stays in for a long period of time in one way or another. And the people that have stayed in is because they get through those growing pains. Like, I mean, it's one of those things that, like, 1 out of 100 might survive more than 5 years. And it's those people that have gotten through the hard times that that they can make it work a little bit more. But look at how many people that fail. And I shouldn't even say fail, but like they just realize it's not for them. Because it's not really a failure if you're learning something out of it. If you're learning that you can't keep a couple thousand animals and still have a life and make it work financially and stuff like that, like that's not always a failure. I mean, if you intentionally like killed all the animals and made yourself go crazy, then we might be in the,
that's a different story.
Yeah, in the fail.
Yeah.
If you realize you can't do it and you get out without hurting too many animals, then at least you learned. You know what I mean? And I think a lot of people learn, unfortunately, the hard way, that like it's not for everybody. And it's like even I didn't stay in it forever. And I had one of the best collections in the world at one point, but there are certain things that can happen in life that that will definitely change your trajectory and what you want out of life and what what's important to you. Because I mean, even with like simple things like the mealworm allergy and stuff like that, like there were a lot of times where like I'd have to be on an inhaler and like have to suit up basically to feed the animals. And I mean, there's it gets hard on your body, like especially if you're allergic to mealworms. Try feeding off 100,000 mealworms whenever you're allergic to them. Like that's not a good time. No matter how well you're doing with it, like it's not fun. You're vacuuming shit all day long. That's why I had a TV in my gecko room so that I could watch Sports Center for half the morning, or the NHL network or whatever I was watching at the time. Because like literally you would just have to get into the zone and just clean. And was it all crap? No. Like I've got to do some really cool things because of what I did with leopard geckos and the people that I've met and stuff like that. I mean, it's very weird, like the feeling now of once being kind of known for doing leopard geckos, and now kind of it's almost getting to the point where it's like you get not really forgotten, but like people don't know if they didn't know you then, they didn't know that you did it, type of thing. So it's one of those weird situations where, I think now more people are getting to know me for like actually who I am than Matt the Gecko breeder, if that makes sense. Which is cool in a way too. But it's also one of those like weird things where it's like, you kind of want to show them what you did do at one point, but it's definitely like a a teeter-totter of emotions sometimes about whenever you talk to other influencers or whatever, but they don't even really know what you did back then, type of thing. I think it's like kind of what this whole podcast has kind of been about for you, and kind of helping to tell the history of certain things, and having people appreciate like where things have come from whenever they were back in the early days of leopard gecko breeding, and how it became popular, and all this other stuff. And that's definitely one of the reasons why I've reached out to you, and wanted to see if you wanted to do any collaboration with this, and just to get some more of that history out there, because it's like you've said, without this history being out there, like it could be lost and nobody would ever know that it happened.
I 100% agree with you because there's so much stuff to know, and just the amount of knowledge you have, it's insane. You're like an encyclopedia with all the stuff that you know. And going forward, there's so much history that's already been lost or is close to being lost because a lot of people don't understand where things have came from or who were some of the people. Like we talked about this earlier, but kind of Alberto has taken a back seat when you talk about leopard gecko history and kind of the role he played, just because Ron Trimper was more of the bigger guy at the time, and Ron did some amazing stuff. But there's so many other like key players that I don't think that we talk about, that kind of created a little bit of the world that we're living in today when it comes to leopard gecko and breeding. So it's really important for people to really understand that, but then also where they could take that information in the future and then use that information to spread it, and then also use it for their collections and how they're thinking about doing things to make kind of leopard geckos on top again, and how it kind of used to be a little bit, where we're creating a tighter community, we're creating awesome animals, which I think is kind of the main goal, but then we're also spreading this feeling of community and education and really getting people together kind of to what the core of what it's all about.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's it's one of those weird things where there's so much history in the reptile hobby itself, not just with leopard geckos.
Yeah.
There was actually a book that was written not too long ago called The Dragon Traders, and it really gives kind of some insight of the early years of reptile keeping and stuff like that. And after getting that book and kind of leafing through it, I think it basically kind of takes you up to the 90s or something like that, like late 80s, early 90s. And it's like, I almost want to see like a second version of this book that touches on like right where this book leaves off, and then kind of get you up into the 2000s kind of thing, because this book is like probably like 300 pages or something like that. It's crazy, and you guys should all get it. It's a very, very cool book, and it even has like some of the old school herpers in there, and some of the old school like importers and stuff like that, of where stuff used to come in through and stuff like that. But if you look at a lot of like podcasts about ball pythons and stuff like that, you can see there's so much history, and like this book doesn't even really talk about any of that, even because it kind of happens after this book ends. So it would be really cool to see like a second version of this book, and then it might even be able to touch a little bit on the leopard gecko community and the different communities of reptile keeping. Because like there's so many big players that aren't even like in this book, like the Kevin McCurleys and the Brian Barcheks, and I don't even know if the Bells are actually even in this book. So, it would be one of those crazy things to like, have that second chapter of this book and kind of show some more of the history that's a little bit more not as long ago for people to kind of appreciate, how good they have it now. I mean, with the internet and YouTube and like you could look up anything, you know what I mean? And there really wasn't any of that even really whenever I started. It was very, very primitive. So, and, I really haven't been around that long. So it's one of those things where there is so many years of, history that people might not ever know, honestly.
Well, it looks like you have a little bit of writing to do, Matt.
No, it's one of those things that, if I write a book, it's kind of funny because like I've been told that I should write a leopard gecko book, and it would be very, very hard for me to write one, honestly. And that's just kind of like like I can sit here and talk to you all day long about leopard geckos and all that stuff. I don't know if I could write it down the same way. And that's just kind of like a deficiency in my mental capacity, if you will, where I don't think I'd be able to write a book. Like I could never write like, papers in school and stuff like that. Like, cause I would literally just say, well, this is the way it is. And that's, all I really need to write, these 2 sentences. I can't like make it drag on and like really get into a lot of detail like I could if I could just talk about it. So that's another reason why I'd rather do it on like a podcast like this, is because then you can actually talk about the history. But it would be cool if the author's name is Michael Berger, if he would write a second part to it, which kind of explains some of the the ball python industry and stuff like that, where like stuff was coming in from Africa and people paying literally tens of thousands of dollars for things and stuff like that. So I'll leave the writing of books up to people that do better at writing about stuff than I would.
Yeah, definitely. And it's just crazy, like, to think of it in kind of the holistic way, and more at a kind of the reptile community view, because there's so much stuff and there's so many things that have happened, and really keeping track of everything. And even like going back, I think I was talking with someone else, one of my closer breeder friends, and we were talking about some of the stuff on the forums, and even like going back to search for some of that stuff, like even the blizzard, like the only like version of like history of where the blizzard came from me talking with you, and then also getting my hands on that initial reptile magazine where kind of the blizzard was unveiled and hearing the story behind that. But a lot of the stuff on Gecko Forum, some of the links are broken, and some of the kind of the conversation and pictures and images, it's not on there anymore, just because of like how internet has moved, and like you can't go back to see some of that stuff. So really, again, capturing some of that stuff for people to hear and have that opportunity to even educate themselves on it, it's really been an important part of the hobby.
Absolutely. And, just in the past like couple of days, I've actually been thinking about, taking some screenshots of some of, the old like forum pages and stuff like that. I'm actually going to go see if I can like find some of them of like, whenever the white and yellows were first talked about on Geckos Unlimited. And, that's where Geckos Unlimited is where I posted the Typhoon for the first time. And I think that's still up there, but I haven't gone on Geckos Unlimited in years. So I wouldn't even know if it's still there or not, or even if Geckos Unlimited forum is still up and running. I mean, it might be totally gone. But take screenshots of that kind of thing and maybe just post those pictures on like my Facebook page or something like that, so that people can actually see some of this history and have the dates to it and stuff like that. It would be kind of cool.
Yeah, and it just gets me thinking about how much stuff like there is still to do, and getting all this information out there to people, because there's so much. It's like crazy to even think about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's like every year there's more. So it's, it's one of those things where you gotta stay on top of it.
Definitely. Well, Matt, I want to thank you again for coming on. For I think we're on part 3.
Yep.
Getting this going, and then also talking with you and having this opportunity to really get this information for me, and then getting to know you a little bit better. It's really awesome to get this out there to the people.
Well, absolutely, and it's definitely been really fun doing this with you, and we'll make a couple more episodes before we finish this up, and we'll definitely maybe I can be a guest more often for you.
Yeah, and maybe even get some of the older guys on the Gecko Nation radio days, and start a whole thing with that, and getting more people out there to talk about some of the stuff that they went through too.
Absolutely, that'd be really cool. Maybe I could talk Alberto into coming on for you if he has any time.
That would probably be awesome.
Cool. Yeah.
Because getting his perspective on some of that stuff, that'd be sick.
Yeah, it would be really cool. I mean, he definitely has a very strong Italian accent, but it would probably be cool for the people.
Yeah, definitely. Well, Matt, again, I wanted to thank you for coming on, and we're going to have to do a couple more of these to make sure we get the full story.
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to it.
Awesome. Have a good one.
You too.
Another great episode from this series, Under Wraps. I hope you guys enjoyed this one, along with all the other ones. Tons of information on this one, so you guys might have to listen to this one a couple of times, because I know I did. And as you guys know, at the end of each and every episode, I do my one big thing. And really, my one big thing for this episode will just be what we talked about in the leopard gecko. What we talked about in this episode, which was history and the importance of knowing your history and everything that goes along with that, which we pretty much covered all through this episode. So just a strong emphasis on that and why it's important to know your leopard gecko history. Another thing is, if you guys haven't already checked out, make sure to check out our YouTube channel, Strength in Leos, on YouTube, which we're also doing a lot of amazing pictures that go along with this podcast series. And for any of the other podcasts, we also have video for that, so make sure to go ahead and check that out as well. Don't forget to share with a friend, rate our podcast, and subscribe. If you would like to support us, please check out our support page at patreon.com/strengthinleos, or buy a t-shirt, mug, or hoodie on our website. Follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Strength in Leos. And last but not least, tune in next time for our next episode on Spotify, iTunes, Google Music, and our website, strengthinleos.com. This is your host, Evan Wooldridge, signing off. Continue to grow in knowledge and share the strength in Leos.